Hi class, and welcome to week 6 of Women Mentoring Women. We are almost now to the end of this course. We have this week and then 2 other weeks up ahead, and from then on you'll be working towards finishing your final project, your mentoring project, which I'll give you some more instruction for a little bit later on, but we'll look forward to reading those and getting those in. But I just thank you for your patience this week, as it took me a minute to just get everything online that I needed to, with a lot of stuff going on here. As well as just some internet problems that I was having. So anyways, thank you for your patience and your continued diligence in the online course and the dialogues and the discussion boards. I'm still trying to get through all of those, but I've just been enjoying how you all have been dialoguing with one another and contributing to these subjects. And next week, I'll actually probably be most likely posting a second discussion board for you graduate students. For the last 2 weeks, want to add some questions in there from the Pearson text and just get your feedback on some of that as well. So this week, the discussion is, I'm going to be looking down here at my own personal notes as well, on women mentoring activities. So once we've developed those the women's ministry in our church or our parachurch organizations and have those relationships going, either through those veins or just in our own lives, what are some activities that we can do, that we can think about within those actual relationships? And so just thinking on that today and this whole week, and what are some of those activities? And I do think that this is a great place where we all can learn from one another. One, on what are some unique things that the Lord has brought to you to do in mentoring relationships, and then maybe what are some things that haven't gone so well that you might want to bring out as well in your discussion board questions, and so we can learn from you all in that way as well. So when you look through the PowerPoints this week, I just want to walk through them myself and give you a few notes personally and teach through this PowerPoint with you as you kind of go through it. And at first you're going to see there in our introductory slide those 4 points, starting with mentoring does not just happen. And, a lot of times when we think about those people that are so natural in our lives that we've been walking with, that have walked with us, we do think sometimes, oh, that just happened. But normally at the beginning of a relationship, it's someone really noticing someone else, intentionally coming alongside of them, or them intentionally seeking you out as a mentor. Remember, like I talked about last week, that a mentor is different than a teacher, because teachers, we don't really choose those, especially when we're younger. They're chosen for us, but mentors are usually always chosen. Whether that's verbalized or not, they're always selected. And so mentoring doesn't just happen. We have to be intentional, and even if that means intentionality in prayer, asking God to bring these relationships together and to foster those and continue to keep them spiritually healthy and just committed to one another, which is the second point there, being committed and passionate about mentoring. And I think that a lot of times this passion and commitment is caught rather than it's taught. We exhibit passion, we exhibit commitment in our lives, and then I think that in turn spurs other people on to want to do this very thing that we're doing with mentoring. And then those that we do mentor, they also want to do this as well in their lives. I know for me, just seeing the people, how they have walked with me in life, how they have mentored me, has encouraged and spurred me on to be passionate about this as well, and to want to invest in the lives of younger people coming behind me, whether that's even younger in age or just spiritually, and pouring into them just like I've been poured into for many years now. The third one there on that opening slide, be intentional to influence others for godliness, which we've talked about earlier, just that this doesn't just happen, but we must be intentional towards godliness. And Paul says that in his writing, that physical training is of some value, but training for godliness has value for all things. So why would we not want to train people towards the very thing that's going to keep them forever? That's why I do biblical interpretation in my degree. I want to study the one thing in God's Word that will never fail away, that will never pass away, it will never not be valuable or useful in people's lives. So I want to study that to be able to give that to other people as well. And then lastly there, act as a lifetime mentor, as a friend, encourager, or as a seasonal mentor. And that's pretty self-explanatory. Acting as a lifetime mentor to someone, this doesn't mean you have to necessarily talk to them every single day, but as you grow in age, as they grow in a relationship, other people may come into the picture, but you can always be a touchstone for them. Just like I've had people that I can still call that have known me for so long, and I may not talk to them for a month or two, but it just comes back and I'm able to talk to them and pick right back up, and love having those kind of people in my life. Or we could talk about, like that last one says, there being a seasonal mentor. I love this, and it's been hard to realize that as I've gotten older, that sometimes I'm just meant to be a seasonal mentor in someone's life, and then other people came along and just for that semester or that year or that summer, they were a mentor to me, or I was a mentor to someone else, and it was just for that time, and that's okay. I think when we're younger, it's hard to let go of that, and you want to always hold on, but just praying and asking God for that discernment. How long am I to be in this person's life, or they to be in my life? But there's different times and longevities that we're going to have when we talk about mentoring and the activities that we do in those relationships. And the next slide, for the next several slides, you see there a lot of general activities listed. And I tried to include some fun pictures for you there, and just reminders that every mentor is unique, because we're going to bring out different activities that we do, that have been effective in our relationship or that are unique to our personality. Of course, with all of them in common should be pointing to the center of our lives, which is Jesus Christ, the very best thing that any of us have ever had or ever will have. But what does that mean? I mean, the general activities, and I'm not going to go through each of them because I know you can read through those and understand what they are. But of course, I'm always being intentional and thinking spiritual truths when I'm hanging out with people, especially in mentoring situations. But I don't, this is going to sound sort of maybe non-Christian PC, even though I may not always be talking about Jesus, 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 I'm spending time with them, intentional time, leading up for times when I will talk more spiritually, with them, especially younger people. So when I list these general activities, it doesn't mean that each one has to be so overly spiritual and driven by Bible study or anything like that, but intentionally hanging out and doing activities that are mutually liked by both people, just giving quality time to one another, ministry of presence I have there. I love that phrase. Just be in my presence. Just be here. Let's hang out together. Looking forward to times when we can be more deep, and all those little moments will add up when we add in activities that we do in those relationships. When I think about general activities, then moving on to the more specific ones that I list later in the slides, when we talk about spiritual mentoring, social mentoring, specific time mentorings that we have, I think back to the book of John, which I mentioned last week, I think, or week before in the lecture, when we look at John 1, and we see Jesus being encountered by Andrew, and seeing him follow him, and he says, where what do you seek? And Andrew says, where are you staying? And Jesus says, come and see. And he invites them in, and they have this meal together. They talk together. We know he goes to get Peter, and then Jesus will go down to the wilderness, and then a month later he's back up in Galilee calling them to follow him. And so, but Jesus has this relationship with them. He's just hanging out. He's spending time. He's answering questions. And then the very last chapter of John, chapter 21, it's been 3 years. These men have walked with him. And then Peter, at that time, we know, has denied Christ 3 times by the fire that night in Jerusalem. And he has gone back out fishing. And in John chapter 1, he comes barreling back up to the shore when he knows that it's Jesus there, the resurrected Christ. And Jesus reinstates him there on the beach. And he's saying, do you love me, Peter? And we know that scene that 3 times Peter says, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And I think every time Jesus is saying, he never says to him, did you love me back by that fire when you forgave me? Or, excuse me, when you denied me. But he just says, do you love me today, Peter? Do you love me? And it's a really intense discipleship moment there, defining moment in Peter's life that would turn the rest of the course of his life upside down in pursuit of Christ and building the first century church and what we know today. And so we think about John 1 when he just encounters him and he's hanging out all the way up till John 21, and you can't have one without the other. And so general activities, just learning how to spend time with one another, pray together, sharing blessings and burdens, and writing notes, speaking words of encouragement, mutual activities together. All these things add up to those important times in people's lives when they need to know who's going to be there they can talk to, or who needs to help them get reinstated back in ministry. Of course, only Christ can do that, but who's going to be their mediator to help them, give them strength to get to Christ and to bring him to him. And so just thinking about that, and you know, throughout these slides we mention a lot of verses out of Paul's writing. I know there's some from Peter's as well, but mostly we see Paul references here: Galatians, Colossians, Romans. And why is that? Because just like one of your earlier discussion posts, you're looking through Paul's letters and you see a man who absolutely loved people, for one thing. I mean, he tracks people all over. He keeps track of everyone. At the end of his letters, we see so many names that he's like, so and so is here, and so deserted me, but now I know that they're in Crete or they're in Dalmatia, and he keeps track of everyone. And no one's story is ever over with Paul. He always is saying things like, perhaps they will repent and turn back to the Lord. And you know, in Philippians we say, you know, please correct Euodia and Syntyche, because their names are written in the book of life. You know, these cantankerous women, and yet he says their names are written in the book of life. The story is never over. So he loves people. We see that with Timothy and with Titus especially. These two young men he calls his true children in the faith, his son in the faith. In Jewish circles and even in the Greco-Roman world, I may have mentioned this in an earlier lecture, but there, for a man to call another boy or a child his child or his son that was not his father would be a total slam to his real dad, or a diss. And so if he's doing that, then it must mean that Timothy's dad is not in the picture like we suspect, because he mentions his mother and grandmother who have raised him. And then also for Titus, that he's sort of an orphan in that way with no father. So Paul is taking them under his wing as spiritual children, but also Timothy and Titus must be acknowledging him. They're borrowing him as a father as well, father figure. And that's why I think they're resilient guys, because they have Paul in their lives. And so that's a big deal for him to call them that. And so in every letter that we have from Paul, that where he had visited that church over and over, he says, you know, follow my example in this. Remember the things that I taught you. Remember when I was with you, when we did the prayers and when we fasted and prayed. Remember these things. And in two letters that we have where he's not yet been, one Colossians and one in Romans, he's not been to Colossae and he's not been to Rome, though these are churches started by his disciples. Those two letters, he doesn't actually say, follow my example, because he wasn't there, but he gives them instructions about what is right in the faith to do. So even when he's not in their presence, or he hasn't met them yet, one, he's still giving them instructions. He loves mentoring. He loves discipling. And even through letters, even through written words to people he hasn't even met necessarily in person, or maybe he even has, because we see in the end of Romans in chapter 16, just name after name after name that he lists to give greetings to. One, he's not been there before, so we can see how the first century church is just moving around so much. But also, we just see how he cares for people and he keeps track of them. And he knows he's such a networker. And so he's always concerned about the end picture and running the race well, not just for himself but for others. So that's the reason why we focus so much on Paul's writing when we look at these general activities, and as you go through those yourself this week. And the last thing, I alluded to it a few minutes ago, the specific activities. I listed there three things: a social mentor, or really these are Dr. Rhonda's points, and I'm just kind of adding some of my own little things here and there with them. But the social mentor, you know, that mature Christian person who's assigned to a new church or youth group, team member, for the purpose of entry and growth into a new environment. You know, you can very easily find those girls in your youth group or in your women's ministry who are just very sanguine and outgoing and can easily bring new people in. And that's the type of mentoring, just to help them adjust to that new environment. Always a key person you want to be looking for there. Of course, a spiritual mentor, we've been talking about that all throughout the semester, what that looks like, and helping younger Christians, whether chronologically or just in the faith, to grow and be there and disciple them. And then I have last there a seminary mentor, but this could be, of course, in any youth group or age stage specific group that you have in your church. But, you know, a person who's farther along in a certain program or a certain time, mentoring